I'm a feminist.
I am a feminist.
I'm a feminist.
I'm a feminist.
I'm a feminist.
I'm a feminist.
Alrighty.
How do we feel about women having rights?
Yes.
Fabulous.
Really cool thing.
Yeah, women's rights. That checks out as feminist. But that was an easy one. Let's see if the next one reveals the fake feminist.
What would you say is the most feminist thing about yourself?
For me, it's just like uplifting women's voices for women's rights.
I think supporting women in all areas. So reproductive rights, work, pay rights, all that type of stuff.
Gee, that was boring. When she asked, what would you say is the most feminist thing about yourself? I thought they would say something like, I'm the leader of a slam poetry group, or I have armpit hair.
If you are not used to seeing women with body hair like this or this, if you're scared of a woman with natural body hair, you're a little boy.
Now that is some hardcore feminism. Why didn't Jubilee call her for this game show? Let's continue. I think one of the players has it figured out now.
My eye immediately went to Emma. I was like, that very much could be a conservative woman in this group, just based on her outfit. It was a great outfit. She looked great.
Wait, you actually practice self-care and take care of your appearance?
Your body and your appearance doesn't exist to please your partner.
Well, you can't be a feminist because feminists are supposed to make themselves ugly. What a self-own. The feminists even admit they know what's up. With that said, this is Jubilee's Odd One Out, a game show where a group of people try to figure out which one of them is not like everyone else. The game is played in a series of rounds where one person is voted off each round. At the end, if the remaining players decide to end the game after the faker is voted off, then they win a cash prize. If the faker ends up still being there, then they lose. Spoilers, there's no faker in this one. All of them were feminist. We aren't here to play the game. We are here to instead talk about the topics that were discussed during the game, because this one got political. The most interesting thing about the conversation being that when the feminists described their opponents' standpoints, multiple times they got the wrong reasoning for why their opponents believe what they believe. For example, in this next clip, they talk about sports.
I'm wondering how you guys feel about trans women in women's sports.
I'm down for it.
I'm a trans person myself, and I think the root of that problem tends to stem with we're protecting children, but you can't say you're protecting children if you're kicking out trans children.
What? The root of the problem for why people are opposed to trans women participating in female sports is children? No, these are two separate issues. First, the issue with children has nothing to do with sports. When people say protect children, they're talking about explicit material in school books, family-friendly drag shows, and the morality of allowing a 12-year-old to make permanent life-altering decisions before they know anything about the world. How can you comment on this topic when you don't even know what you're arguing against? Second, the issue with sports is because there are biological advantages that men have over women that make it so average male athletes can beat top female athletes who essentially sacrificed their entire childhood and much of their young adulthood to train for an insane amount of hours so they could be a top competitor in a sport like swimming.
By the time I was 8 years old, that's when I transitioned to swimming year-round. So this meant that in second grade, you're swimming 2 hours every single day. And it really only gets harder from there because by the time you get to middle school and high school, you're practicing before school. Then you go straight to school, and straight from school, you go back to practice. After practice, you go home, you eat your dinner, you do your homework, you ice your shoulder, you go to bed, but you wake up and do it all again the next day.
That was competitive swimmer Riley Gaines, who was describing how she spent essentially 4 hours a day swimming from middle school all the way into adulthood. And remember that this is in addition to having to go to school and do homework. 4 hours a day of practice basically means that you have no life. With that in mind, let's continue with the Jubilee video.
Emma, what do you think? You haven't said anything.
I'm kind of I'm not against it. I'm not so much. I feel like I don't have a clear answer because with kids, when you talk about kids doing it, I don't think with children, I think everyone should, everyone's the same, they have the same strengths and everything like that. But I think in professional sporting situations, I might need to educate myself more on this, so this might be what I need to come out of today and do, but I think trans women still have more strength than women, but even saying that, they're women, but I feel like it's not even exactly.
Wow, you can really see her winding up for that one. She did not want to directly answer that question out of fear of offending someone. Who exactly are the bullies here, by the way? Why did she feel like she had to apologize for simply stating her opinion? You don't need to educate yourself, Emma. The difference in athletic ability is obvious, yet because some people are so belligerent in how they treat people with differing ideas, Emma feels like she has to apologize throughout her entire point, to the extent where another player has to console her and let people know that it's okay for her to say her opinion.
Like they have an advantage, you would say?
Yeah, like a slight
Okay.
advantage.
So you might be against it, maybe?
I mean, see, I don't want to say that though because then I'm not really supporting all women.
Okay.
But
So if it's professional, let's be honest. If you're good, you're good. I think if a transgender woman went up to play tennis against Serena Williams, and it's a transgender woman, she'd probably more than likely lose.
Because Serena Williams is one of the
Skills.
greatest of all time.
So
Bad take. In the 90s, Serena Williams and her sister very famously lost to a male tennis player who was nowhere near the top. I mean, this is something that people pretty consistently bring up on the opposing side when the topic of sports comes up. So if these guys on Jubilee haven't heard that, then it means they aren't listening.
when we talk about strength and stuff, sometimes it's just skill.
yeah, so I think for sure, like there's some that like they're absolutely even, but I think in very limited areas of sport, then like there might be a slight advantage. But things, yeah, like tennis and soccer, like those type of things are all skill.
I can't believe that was just said. None of these people play sports. They should immediately stop speaking because they have no idea what they're talking about. Also, I'm going to take back what I said before. Emma is brave for having a dissenting opinion in this game, but maybe she does need to educate herself. Playing tennis requires an insane amount of conditioning. Do you know how much of a huge advantage it is to be able to run faster than your opponents? Do you know what a big deal it is in tennis to have more endurance? Men are naturally better at both of those. Not to mention that men don't have to factor in a menstrual cycle into their training. Physical conditioning matters in every sport. That's why athletes cheat by taking steroids. And physical conditioning matters a lot, especially in sports like swimming, where conditioning and body type is a huge part of determining who wins. In the case of Leah Thomas, being a below-average biological male athlete ranked 462 nationally in the men's division was enough to rank at the top in every freestyle event category after switching to women's sports.
This swimmer was ranked at the top in everything, all the freestyle events from the 100 freestyle, which is a sprint, everything in between to the mile, which the mile is long distance. And so think about your Olympic runners. Your best 200-meter runner is not your best marathon runner. But that's what we were seeing in this individual. Those are totally different systems.
This is crazy because some of these events require different types of conditioning, and Leah Thomas was still able to win. If we're talking about the physiology here, sprinting and endurance exercises require different types of muscle fibers and stress different systems of recovery. If you're competing with top athletes who are maxing everything out, you can't win both types of events because you would have to sacrifice growth in one of the events to be a winner in another. The difference in physical ability is so great here that Riley said that the worst male athlete on her college swim team could destroy the best female athlete, no question. And Leah Thomas was beating the female competition by huge margins.
Leah dominates, beats everyone in the water by seconds, which in swimming, even 1 second is a ton. But Leah beat everyone in the water by multiple seconds, body lengths. And these are Olympians. These are the most impressive female swimmers of all time.
This is not some trivial issue. These are women who are sacrificing a huge portion of their lives to achieve something, only to have that dream destroyed by someone who doesn't want to play fair. Yet the feminists who started out this Jubilee game saying that they are all here for women will brush off these issues people have with sports as religious dogma or hate.
Well, and a lot of times, let's just call it what it is. It's about people's religion. It's about your ideology, your religion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And which,
Back control.
again, has no place in.
They're shielding their hate.
Yeah.
Again, this is a complete misunderstanding of the arguments. None of the counter-arguments I've mentioned here have anything to do with religious belief. Joe Rogan isn't religious, and he's spoken out about the sports issue many times over the years. Now, the reason these Jubilee contestants have a bad understanding of what people are arguing is because they are very discriminatory of who they allow in their group and will shut out anyone who wants to add nuance to their opinions.
Well, yeah, I just want to see because I was wondering, I don't know how the casting works. I don't know if there's any turfs or swerfs in the group because I don't determine that to be feminism.
Slay.
Because, like, for me, trans women are women, so we should be protecting all women, not just cis women.
Unless you completely agree with me, you aren't allowed to call yourself a feminist. Imagine the irony of saying that you are super inclusive and support all women, but actually revealing that you will discriminate heavily against a woman for not having the exact same ideology as you do. Also, did that guy just say you can't call yourself a feminist if you don't like sex work? What? I guess radfems are purely against sex work because they are sexist, and not because of things like the large amount of trafficking that happens in that industry. He's very literally saying that he won't listen to someone unless they already agree with him. I mean, shit, I don't agree with ABBA and Preach on a few things, but I'm not out here calling for them to turn in their anti-woke card. That would be ridiculous, and it would rob me of the insight that they have when they explain why they believe what they believe when it comes to where we disagree. Speaking of how these feminists talk like they're in a cult.
You said something about agreeing with women no matter what they do. Like, I fully disagree. I feel like feminism, you have to hold women accountable. Like, there are women like J.K. Rowling who like leading and spearheading a transphobia movement in the UK, and you can't like hide behind feminism when you were literally hurting women and children.
Oh, totally.
Hold J.K. Rowling accountable for being a feminist who disagrees with you? That doesn't sound like a cult at all. I wonder what this person would say if I asked them, why do you think J.K. Rowling has an issue with the trans movement? Do you think this person, Emmett, would be able to accurately describe J.K. Rowling's beliefs? Or would Emmett radically misinterpret Rowling's beliefs and suggest that her lack of complete ideological conformity is causing people's lives to end?
I have no problem with about sports and stuff, but I also don't want to silence the J.K. Rowlings of the world because I believe in democracy. And I believe to know your enemy, I want them to speak. That's how they used to do things in the old days. That's what the KKK does. They hide their face.
Sure.
I want to know who they are, and I want them to speak freely so you know who the enemy is.
Sometimes they get a little violent, though, and it turns into other
that's,
things.
Violence? Where? A protest in January where people got escorted into a building is not violence, nor is a car crash in Virginia an example of widespread violence being caused by free speech. I always find it ironic that the people who are anti-free speech can only point to those two events over the past decade, when there have been dozens of incidences of violent protesting and full-on riots from their side over the past 10 years. There's the Ferguson riots, the Kavanaugh riots, blocking freeways which impedes emergency vehicles, the massive number of riots in 2020, that SUV that drove into a parade, and all the rioting that Antifa has done. So what widespread violence is coming from the free speech group? The Jubilee editors even came in with the assist, too, with a record scratch after the black guy said that he was for free speech as a suggestion that he was wrong for saying that.
But I also don't want to silence the J.K. Rowlings of the world because I believe in democracy.
I give him props for being pro-free speech, though from what he said after the record scratch, I don't think he's in favor of free speech because he wants to engage in conversation with differing opinions. He just wants to hear a couple of key words so he can know who to hate. That's why he essentially said, I want to unmask them, versus, I want to understand their reasoning and hear what they have to say.
I think I understand what you mean. Like, you agree with free speech, but not to the point where it should, like, restrict someone else. Like, you don't have
No, but I definitely want the J.K. Rowlings and the Marjorie Taylor Greens to talk. I want them to talk because I want to know who they are.
They sound so stupid.
Well, stupid, but you also want to know who they are.
It's really ironic that they would suggest that people like J.K. Rowling are stupid when both of them couldn't even accurately describe what their opponents think when it comes to trans women in women's sports. They're supposed to be the smart ones, yet they don't even know what they're arguing against. And that kind of inaccuracy and lack of understanding makes it really easy to strawman and hate people who disagree with you because you aren't actually disagreeing with the person, you are disagreeing and hating some fake construct that you've developed because you're too lazy to do research or too close-minded to actually listen to people who don't agree with you. Which is the exact kind of narrative that all the woke stuff has been pushing. Don't actually investigate the thing you're discussing, just repeat an opinion that you merely have because it was the first thing you were exposed to on the subject, not because you actually looked at both sides, thought about it critically, and came to a conclusion. However, I think what we're seeing in the new cultural meta is that a pretty large number of people are tired of having their values misrepresented and trashed by people with radicalized beliefs who care more about looking morally superior than they care about helping people or bettering society. Probably the most recent example of this is all the drama happening around the Snow White movie and the lead actress Rachel Zegler. Now, just in case you've been living under a rock for the past few weeks or you're watching this way in the future, here's a clip from an interview with her that sums a lot of it up.
The reality is that the cartoon was made 85 years ago, and therefore it's extremely dated when it comes to the ideas of women being in roles of power and what a woman is fit for in the world. And so when we came to reimagining the actual role of Snow White, it became about the fairest of them all, meaning who is the most just and who can become a fantastic leader. And the reality is, Snow White has to learn a lot of lessons about coming into her own power before she can come into power over a kingdom.
Spoken like a true Marxist. We're going to reimagine a very popular movie and redefine fair to mean just instead of attractive. How do we have a villain then? The original story of Snow White was about vanity and about how a queen was jealous that her stepdaughter was more attractive. which is actually kind of a message that leftists and feminists should agree with about valuing personality over appearance, as Snow White mainly charms people with her character and not her looks. Evidence of that being that both Snow White and the Queen are attractive, but the characters in the story hate the Queen while they like Snow White. But now the Queen is trying to be fair and just, so I guess she's the hero of the story in this version. Also, this quote from the original movie.
Hair black as ebony, skin white as snow. Snow White.
It's always funny to see people who will screech about cultural appropriation because a white person wants to wear Japanese clothes, yet they will take a European story with a character who is described as having skin as white as it possibly can be, with the word white in her name, and cast a Latina or a Latinx. I'm sorry about that mistake. Please don't call me a racist. Or is that technically a phobe instead of an ist? These days, I'm not sure anymore. But this would be like taking a character named Snow Black or Snow African American and casting her as a white person. In fact, since race-swapping remakes are such a popular trend, let's do a remake of Friday with all white characters and change Felicia's name to Samantha for modern audiences. Race swaps are in vogue now, so that's okay, right? So now Snow White isn't white, and the dwarves aren't even dwarves anymore, because I guess some Game of Thrones actor doesn't want competition. Certainly other people in that group don't agree with him.
But I do think that this is Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Why are you hiring Snow White and the Seven Average People?
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Do you think there's anything Disney can do to make this right? Like, what do they have to do, you know?
Well, if they want to make it right, they redo the movie and they recast. Okay. And they get Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs.
Though maybe this is beside the point in this particular case, because mostly the audience is mad about the fact that the creators of this remake are trying to take the fan base of a popular IP and crap all over the source material, because it's clear that Rachel Zegler hasn't really looked at the original story.
I mean, you know, the original cartoon came out in 1937, and very evidently so. There's a big focus on her love story with a guy who literally stalks her.
Yeah.
Weird.
Super weird.
So we didn't do that this time.
Weird. It's funny because there's a whole TikTok trend of people mimicking these interviews and making fun of her.
Weird. So we didn't do that this time.
Outside of the comedy, did she even watch the movie? Snow White literally tells a story to the dwarves about how much she wants Prince Charming, and then she sings a song about him.
Once there was a princess, and she fell in love. Anyone could see that the prince was charming. The only one for me. He was so romantic.
In order to be a stalker, you have to be unwanted. Now, you possibly could say that he is unwanted because Snow White runs away from him in the opening scene, but if you watch that scene for more than 5 seconds, you can see that she runs away from him not because she doesn't want him, but because she is dressed in rags and doesn't feel presentable. You would have to be watching the movie with a very particular bias to not notice her body language here.
And we absolutely wrote a Snow White that is
not going to be saved by the prince.
She's not going to be saved by the prince, and she's not going to be dreaming about true love. She's dreaming about becoming the leader she knows she can be.
So Snow White is the villain in the remake because they just described the queen from the original movie. Someone who doesn't want love or happiness. She only cares about being a girl boss leader who has no real friends or significant other because no one likes her. Rachel even said, I don't know, maybe they'll cut Prince Charming from the movie.
So no prince or a different kind of prince?
We have a different approach to what I'm sure a lot of people will assume is a love story just because, like, we cast a guy in the movie, right. Andrew Burnap, great dude. Whether or not she finds love along the way is anybody's guess until 2024. All of Andrew's scenes could get cut. Who knows? It's Hollywood, baby. But it's
Andrew Burnap, great dude. By the way, I hope all his scenes get cut from the movie in the name of feminism. Why exactly are you making a movie called Snow White then? This is basically theft because you're taking the original fan base and telling them, hey, we're doing Snow White. But then you make a completely different movie. You're stealing the notoriety of someone else's project because you guys aren't good enough to write an original story that people will actually watch. Snow White is not a masculine girl boss. She is the literal definition of a feminine woman. She's kind, caring, happy, soft, modest, and she loves children. She is so feminine that she breaks into someone else's house and immediately starts cleaning it. Then, when the dwarves catch her in the house, she offers to cook, clean, and sew in return for their kindness.
And if you let me stay, I'll keep house for you. I'll wash and sew and sweep and cook and...
Cook? Can you make development?
Yes, and plum pudding and gooseberry pie.
Gooseberry pie! Hooray! She made!
This is a great character. You have a feminine woman who is skilled in multiple disciplines, and she's a leader. You don't have to be the head of a Fortune 500 company to be a leader. You have to ask, why do these people throw so much hate at a woman who acts like a woman? They are calling themselves feminist, yet trashing anything that's feminine. And at the same time, they don't notice that Snow White spends like half the movie as the leader of the dwarves. She accomplished that by being charming and feminine. If you watch that previous scene in its entirety, they were going to kick her out until she impressed them with her talent. She ends up running that household and convinces the dwarves to change their behavior and be sanitary. You don't need to make her a leader. She was already a leader in the original movie. I'm telling you, Rachel Zegler did not watch this movie.
I was scared of the original cartoon. I think I watched it once and then I never picked it up again. Like, I'm being so serious. I watched it once and then I went on the ride in Disney World, which was called Snow White's Scary Adventures. Doesn't sound like something a little kid would like. Was terrified of it. Never revisited Snow White again. So I watched it for the first time in probably 16, 17 years when I was doing this film.
You watched it once? This movie is only an hour and a half and you've only seen it once since you were a child? Don't actors get paid like millions of dollars on these big movies? I mean, Rachel is here demanding the streaming money too.
If I'm gonna stand there 18 hours in a dress of an iconic Disney princess, I deserve to be paid for every hour that it is streamed online.
So you're telling me that you're getting paid all this money to play a character who historically is a very big deal because it was a first animated movie, and your research was only an hour and a half? Are you kidding? If I got paid $1 million to do this role, which is probably less than she got paid, then I would be watching that movie almost daily and studying it like I'm cramming for a midterm. I would have read the original fairy tale multiple times. I would be studying up on the history of the movie and the history of Disney. I would be watching critical analysis and fan theories on YouTube. This is not that hard to do. Actors have tons of downtime during filming. So do you really think you deserve $1 million+ salary with so little effort? It sounds like we're experiencing the same thing we saw with the Jubilee video. Yeah, I know what those dumb right-wingers believe, followed by them describing the wrong beliefs. Yeah, I know what Snow White is about. I watched like half the movie once. Rachel didn't watch this movie. She sort of watched it with heavy bias and created a fake construct of what the movie was so she could hate it. This is intellectually lazy, and it's why she said Prince Charming is a stalker when he obviously is not. Speaking of actors that people like, let's compare Rachel Zegler to Henry Cavill. Henry Cavill acted in a great Netflix show called The Witcher that kind of had an unfortunate season 3 that resulted in Cavill leaving, but here's what he did in preparation for that role.
I have been a fan of the fantasy genre since I was a boy. My dad would read to me before I could read, and then any of my free time spent reading has always been, well, more often than not, has been reading fantasy genre. I'm a big PC gamer as well, and so I spent a lot of my time playing role-playing games in that genre and played the Witcher games. I played The Witcher 3 through twice.
He played all the games, including a second run-through on Witcher 3. Games like The Witcher take forever to beat, so that is a pretty large undertaking, but that was all before he got cast. And then he found out there were books.
I met the showrunner, and that's when I learned there were books. Read the books, and I realized I was missing out on a whole world of this stuff, because I've been into the fantasy genre since I was a kid. Since before I could read, my dad was reading me fantasy books.
Apparently, there are 7 books in this series, so we're talking about at least 50 hours of reading if he's fast, probably closer to over 100 hours of reading to get through these books. Henry Cavill did all this for this role, yet Rachel can't even be bothered to watch an hour-and-a-half movie more than once. Rachel Zegler also shows a lot of disdain for the source material for Snow White, yet Cavill seems to love all the Witcher stuff.
Yes, I knew about it. I'm a big gamer. I played the games and I read the books, and I loved both of them. I love the adaptation that the games is of the books, and it's a wonderful opportunity for me and indeed for us to be adapting the books into our own way. And it's been an amazing journey, and one I'm looking forward to continuing.
So who would you rather play your favorite character from a book? Henry Cavill, who is someone that loves it and can't get enough of the series? Or Rachel Zegler, who is basically like, screw the original Snow White, it's outdated. The only time I want a lead actor to hate the source material is when it's Robert Pattinson making fun of Twilight.
There's a lot of books in the Cullen household, but know what to expect when you're expecting a half vampire child.
No, they look on Google Images. That was one of the funniest scenes I've ever had to do in my life. It's like, really? We're all like 300-year-old geniuses, and we just go, it's like, vampire baby, like, on Google Images.
Side note, he read the books, which means he also did more research than Rachel. Maybe that's why I think that the first Twilight movie is the best unintended comedy of all time, because his intentional overacting in that film that the directors got mad at him for really sells it. He's doing the character properly. Seriously though, that movie is like a 9 out of 10. Watch it if you haven't. But would you rather have an actor who calls criticism from fans nonsensical discourse, or an actor who says this?
When it comes to fans, it is a fan's right to have whatever opinion they want to have. And people are going to be upset because, especially when you're talking about books or games, because you're never going to be the exact person who they had in their head or who they played on Witcher 3, for example. I don't necessarily consider that toxic. I just consider that passionate.
Yeah, and Henry Cavill can say that because he knows that this could be the only time that the Witcher series gets funding for a live-action show, and he wants to make sure that the fans get a good rendition of The Witcher instead of wasting it like Disney has done with Star Wars and Marvel. But of course he listens to fan criticism, and of course Rachel doesn't, because she is clearly just looking for a paycheck.
I never want it to come off as me being ungrateful for the opportunities I have. I'm so grateful for the things that I'm able to do. Just know that I am the most grateful person alive.
If I'm gonna stand there 18 hours in a dress of an iconic Disney princess, I deserve to be paid for every hour that it is streamed online.
Yes, and humble people always love to mention how they are the most humble person. A little context, this was a clip that came before the drama from the Snow White interviews. Some people were suggesting that it came after, though she does spend a lot of time in that video saying, "Why don't people like me?"
The internet is not my biggest fan. It never has been, but it especially isn't these days. I've made some stupid choices, but I don't think anything to warrant the amount of negativity that I see on the daily.
Gee, maybe you get this kind of negativity because you cheered on Gina Carano unjustly getting kicked off The Mandalorian. Or maybe it's this stuff that she said about Kyle Rittenhouse. Or maybe it's because she mocked Britney Spears during a family crisis, followed by an apology that sounded very insincere. She should have just left Britney alone. Or maybe it's because she cheered on Jeremy Renner being slandered by his ex-wife in a custody battle and offered to replace him as Hawkeye. It seems like she's just looking to step on people to get work.
What made you want to step into this world of DC heroes? I needed a job. I'm being so serious. The reality was we were in the middle of a pandemic and I was not working and I couldn't get a job for the life of me because West Side Story hadn't come out yet, and it was really hard to book work for me.
That was in reference to the movie Shazam, but no wonder they hired her for woke Snow White. She's a desperate bully who will fall in line to promote the message. All this Twitter drama is definitely the kind of behavior that you would expect from a girl who is only known for 2 movies that flopped and a third one that's probably going to flop. Maybe the Hunger Games prequel will do well? By the way, not to let Gal Gadot off the hook for any of this drama, as she was right in there saying the same stuff as Rachel, but with better optics. However, if Rachel Zegler was actually grateful for being able to play Snow White, then she would have put the kind of work in that Cavill did. Cavill was jumping to be a part of The Witcher, and it's not like there aren't people out there who are willing to do that. Another big example of that would be the Deadpool movie, and how Ryan Reynolds fought to make that movie rated R to keep it true to the source material, despite the corporate heads wanting to water it down to PG-13 for money. But the reason people like Henry Cavill can play a good rendition of The Witcher is because they are meticulous in their attempts to understand people and the ways that they behave and the ideas that they have. This dumb hubris of, I know everything so I don't have to do any investigation, is exactly what's leading everyone into trouble. You always have to investigate, and the people who are really smart will behave as if they don't know anything. Because a lot of times you don't. You can see it in the Jubilee video. They aren't even having the right conversation about sports because they don't actually know what their opponents think. They are just looking to be the smartest person in the room, which I think people should have a strong disdain for, because the smartest person in the room is the only one who isn't learning things. Now, personally, I believe that if you're in an argument and not asking the person, what do you mean when you say this, or why do you believe that, then you aren't actually trying to understand the person, and all that's going to do is make everyone angry while solving nothing because you aren't actually talking about the right problem. You're talking about some fake rendition of the problem that you have created because of your biases and because of your experiences. And you can think of it this way. Who would you rather have a disagreement with? Someone who is actively trying to understand your beliefs, Or a person who is just waiting for any opportunity to win so they can call you stupid. I mean, imagine being in a relationship with some of the people that you saw in that Jubilee video. I'm sure it's a nightmare. But if you focus more on treating people how you would ideally like to be treated, then you're going to have much better conversations. Anyway, thanks for watching, follow me on Twitter, and I'll see you in the next video.